fact, there are striking examples to the contrary, or at least apparent examples to the contrary. Say, take, for example, our capacity to deal with abstract properties of the number system. Now, that's a distinctive human capacity, as distinctive as the capacity for language. Any normal human, in fact, down to pathological levels, can comprehend the properties of the number system and can move very far in understanding their deep properties. But it's extremely difficult to believe that this capacity was the result of specific selection. That is, it's hard to believe that people who were a little better at proving theorems of number theory had more children, let's say. That didn't happen. In fact, through most of human evolution, in fact, essentially all of human evolution, this capacity was, it would have been impossible to know that this capacity even existed. The contingencies that allowed it to be exercised never arose. Nevertheless, the trait is there. The capacity is there. The mental organ, if you like, has developed. Presumably, it has developed as a concomitant of some other properties of the brain which may have been selected. For example, we can speculate, say, that that increase in brain size was a factor in differential reproduction, hence in evolution. And it may be that for physical law, because of physical laws that we presently don't know, that an increase in brain size under the specific conditions of human evolution simply leads necessarily to a system which has the capacity to deal with properties of the number system. Well, then that's a matter of physics, ultimately. And then the mind that evolves, the brain that evolves, will have this capacity, but not because it was achieved through selection. Now, I think it's at least likely that something of the sort is true of human language. And, I mean, surely if it were dysfunctional, it wouldn't have been maintained. It's obviously functional. But it's a long leap to claim that the specific structures of language are themselves the result of specific selection, and it's a leap that I don't think is particularly plausible.
What you say, though, about the limitations that this imposes on us prompts in me the following thought. We're all very used, I think, to the idea that in social life, each one of us as individuals tends to construct a picture of the world around his own experience. And indeed, it's difficult to see how we could do anything else. We're bound to do that. We've got no alternative. But it does mean that each one of us forms a systematically distorted view of the world because it's all built up on what accidentally happens to be the particular and really rather narrow experience of the individual who does it. Now, do you think that something of that kind applies to man as a whole because of the reasons implicit in your theory? That is to say, that the whole picture that mankind has formed of the cosmos, of the universe, of the world, must be systematically distorted and what's more, drastically limited by the nature of the particular apparatus for understanding that he happens to have.
Well, I think that is undoubtedly the case, but again I would question the use of the word limited, which carries unfortunate suggestions. That is, I assume that one of our faculties, one of our mental organs, if you like, is, let's call it a science-forming capacity, a capacity to create intelligible explanatory theories in some domain. And if we look at the history of science, we discover that time after time, when particular questions were posed at a particular level of understanding, it was possible to make very innovative leaps of the imagination to rich explanatory theories that presented an intelligible picture of that subdomain of the universe, often wrong theories, as we later discovered, but there's a course that's followed. And this could have been the case only because we do have, and we in fact share across the species, a kind of a science-forming capacity that is that limits us, as you say, but by the same token, provides the possibility of creating explanatory theories that extend so vastly far beyond any evidence that's available. I mean, it's very important to realize that it should be obvious to say, but it's worth saying that when a new theory is created, and I don't necessarily mean Newton, I mean even a small theory, what the scientist is typically doing, first of all, he has very limited evidence. The theory goes far, far beyond the evidence. Secondly, much of the evidence that's available is typically disregarded. That is, it's put to the side in the hope that somebody else will take care of it someday and we can forget about it. So at every stage in the history of science, there's even normal science, not Kuhnian revolutions, there's a high degree of idealization that goes on. So there's selection of evidence, distortion of evidence, creation of new theory, confirmation or refutation or modification of that theory, further idealization. These are all very curious steps. And we're capable of, nevertheless, we can often make them, and make them in a way which is intelligible to others. It doesn't look like some random act of the imagination. And where that's possible, we can develop intelligible theories. We can gain some comprehension of the nature of this aspect of the world. Now, this is possible only because we are rigidly pre-programmed again, because we have somehow developed through evolution or however the specific faculty of forming very particular theories. Of course, it follows at once, or at least it's reasonable to assume that this very faculty, which enables us to construct extremely rich and successful theories in some domain, may lead us very far astray in some other domain. For example, there may be some, again, a Martian scientist looking at us and observing our successes and errors from a higher intelligence, let's say, might be bemused to discover that whereas in some domains we seem to be able to make scientific progress, in other domains we always seem to be running up against a blank wall because our minds are so constructed that we just can't make the intellectual leap that's required. We can't formulate the concepts. We don't have the categories that are required to gain insight into that domain.
Do you think that if our study of our language-forming capacity and hence our cognitive capacities, as you call them, our abilities to know and understand and learn, if these studies that you're pioneering result in an enormously amount of increased knowledge of all these human faculties, do you think it's at all likely that that increased knowledge will enable us to change and indeed expand the faculties?
That, I think, is extremely unlikely, because I think the faculties are a biological given. We may study the structure of the heart, but we don't do so because we think it's possible to replace the heart by another kind of pump, let's say, which might be more efficient. Similarly, here, I think if we ever did gain a real comprehension of the mental organs, that might help us in cases of pathology, marginal cases, in other words. But I wouldn't see how that could give any way, at least with our present science or plausible science, of modifying these capacities. What we might do, however, is at least it's in theory imaginable, that we might discover something about the limits of our science-forming abilities. We might discover, for example, that some kinds of questions simply fall beyond the area where we are capable of constructing explanatory theories. And I think we even maybe now have some glimmerings of insight into where this delineation might be between intelligible theories that fall within our comprehension and areas where no such theory is possible. Well, the case that we discussed before may be one. Take the question of, if you go back to the early history of science, early origins of science, speculation, and people were raising questions about, say, the heavenly bodies and about the sources of human action. Well, we're asking exactly the same questions now about the sources of human action. There's been no progress. We have no idea how to approach this question within the framework of science. We can write novels about it, but we can't construct even false scientific theories about it. We simply have nothing to say when we ask the question, how does a person make a decision in a certain manner and not in some other manner when it's a free decision? We just have no way of dealing with that issue. On the other hand, the history of physics, let's say, has had substantial advances, and it's very likely, I think, that massive difference in progress in one domain and an absolute blank wall in another reflects the specific properties of our science-forming capacities. We might even be able to show that someday if it's true.